The call came on a Tuesday evening, right as I was settling into what had become my post-divorce routine. Take out Chinese food, a glass of mediocre Chardonnay, and whatever mind-numbing reality show would help me forget that 6 months ago, my husband of 8 years had decided our marriage was less appealing than his 24-year-old yoga instructor. I almost didn't answer when I saw my mother's name flash across my phone screen. We hadn't spoken in nearly a year, not since I'd walked out of Thanksgiving dinner after she suggested that maybe if I'd put more effort into my appearance, Mark wouldn't have strayed. But something, maybe loneliness, maybe curiosity, maybe just plain old masochism, made me pick up. "Kelly?" My mother's voice carried that familiar tone, somehow both hesitant and demanding at once. "Is that you?" "Hi, Mom." I cradled the phone between my ear and shoulder, using my free hand to turn down the volume on the TV. "What's going on?" "Well, that's a fine way to greet your mother after all this time." I could practically see her lips pursing through the phone. "I was beginning to think you'd fallen off the face of the earth." I bit back a retort about how phones work both ways, and instead asked again, "What's going on, Mom? Is everything okay?" A pause, then, "Your father and I would like to see you. It's been too long, and we have something we need to discuss. Are you free for dinner this Friday?" My first instinct was to say no, to make up some excuse about work or plans with friends or literally anything that would keep me from having to sit across a dinner table from my parents, fielding passive-aggressive comments about my life choices. But the silence in my apartment suddenly seemed deafening, and the prospect of another Friday night alone felt unbearable. "Sure," I heard myself say. "Friday works." I hung up and immediately regretted my decision. Whatever they wanted to discuss couldn't be good. In my 34 years of experience, discussions with my parents invariably led to criticism, disappointment, and me questioning every life choice I'd ever made. But it was too late now. The dinner was set, and all I could do was prepare myself for whatever storm was brewing. Friday came too quickly. I stood in front of my closet for nearly an hour trying to find something that wouldn't provoke comments. From my mother. Too casual? I didn't care about my appearance. Too dressy? I was trying too hard. Too colorful? Attention-seeking. Too neutral? Boring. I finally settled on dark jeans and a simple blue blouse, the most inoffensive combination I could muster, and made the 30-minute drive to my parents' house in the suburbs. The moment I walked through the door, I was enveloped in my mother's perfume as she hugged me stiffly. "Kelly, darling, you look..." She paused, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. "Well, you look like you're doing okay." From anyone else, it might have been a compliment. From my mother, it was the equivalent of saying I'd barely passed a test. My father emerged from his study, glasses perched on the end of his nose, newspaper still in hand. "There she is," he said, patting my shoulder awkwardly. "Our girl has decided to grace us with her presence." Dinner was a stilted affair, my mother making polite inquiries about my job as a graphic designer. "Is that company still paying you well enough?" Translation: "When are you going to get a real career?" My father offering occasional comments about the economy and how young people these days didn't understand the value of hard work. I nodded, smiled at appropriate intervals, and tried to keep my wine glass from emptying too quickly. It wasn't until my mother brought out dessert, her signature apple pie, which I had to admit was delicious despite everything, that they finally broached whatever topic had prompted this reunion. "Kelly," my father began, clearing his throat, "your mother and I have a situation we'd like to discuss with you." My mother jumped in, her voice taking on that saccharine quality she used when she wanted something. "We've decided to do some major renovations on the house. The contractor says it'll take at least 3 months, maybe 4. The whole place will be torn apart, new kitchen, bathrooms, floors, and we simply can't stay here while the work is being done." I nodded, waiting for the punchline. Were they asking for contractor recommendations? Money? I took another bite of pie, the sweetness suddenly cloying. "We were thinking," my father continued, that since you have that big house all to yourself now, we could stay with you during the renovation. The bite of pie lodged in my throat, and I had to take a gulp of water to avoid choking. Stay with me? I repeated, certain I'd misheard. Just for a few months, my mother said, reaching across the table to pat my hand. You have 4 bedrooms. For heaven's sake, it's not like we'd be in your way. I stared at them, trying to process what they were asking. They wanted to move into my house, the house I'd fought for in the divorce, the one place that felt like truly mine, my sanctuary. The thought of my parents invading that space made my stomach churn. I don't know, I said slowly. My house isn't really set up for guests long term, and I have my routine. Routine? My father scoffed. What routine? Eating takeout and watching TV alone? That's not a routine, that's depression. Dad, Kelly, my mother interjected, her voice softening. We're worried about you. Ever since the divorce, you've isolated yourself. This would be good for all of us. We'd have a place to stay, and you'd have some company. Maybe we could even help you get back on your feet emotionally. I bristled at the implication that I wasn't on my feet, but before I could respond, my father added, and it's not like you don't owe us. Who paid for your college? Who helped with the down payment on your first apartment? And there it was, the guilt trip that had been a staple of my relationship with my parents for as long as I could remember. Whatever they gave, money, time, anything, came with strings attached, to be yanked whenever they needed leverage. I should have said no. Every cell in my body was screaming no. But sitting there, under the weight of their expectant gazes, the years of conditioning kicked in. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad. Maybe, after all this time, we could finally build the relationship I'd always wanted with them. Maybe they'd see me as an adult, respect my space, my choices. Okay, I said, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. But just until the renovation is done. The relief on their faces was immediate, followed quickly by what I could only describe as triumph. My mother clapped her hands together. Wonderful. We'll move in next weekend. I've already started packing some things. Of course she had. She'd known I would say yes. I always did. The week that followed was a flurry of activity as I prepared for my parents' arrival. I cleared out the guest bedroom and the small office, next door that would become my father's temporary study. I deep cleaned every surface, knowing my mother would run her finger along baseboards and shelves, checking for dust. I stocked the refrigerator with the foods they preferred and hid away anything that might provoke comment. The romance novels my mother considered trash, the expensive whiskey my father would disapprove of me spending money on. When they arrived, that Saturday, it was with far more belongings than seemed necessary for a temporary stay. My father's SUV was packed to the roof, and they'd also rented a small trailer that contained, among other things, my mother's prized china cabinet. Mom, I said, watching as 2 movers struggled to navigate the unwieldy piece of furniture through my front door. You're bringing furniture? I thought this was just for a few months. Well, I can't possibly leave this in the house during construction, she replied. The dust alone would ruin it, and where else would I put my good china? You certainly don't have anything suitable. I bit my tongue and directed the movers to place the cabinet in the dining room, which I rarely used anyway. By the end of the day, my house had been transformed. My parents' possessions occupied not just their bedroom and my father's study, but had spilled into common areas as well. My mother's knickknacks cluttered surfaces that had been minimalist and clean. My father's recliner now dominated a corner of the living room where my reading nook had been. There, my mother said, stepping back to admire the china cabinet now filled with her prized plates and teacups. Now it feels a bit more like home. Not my home, I thought, but said nothing. The first week wasn't terrible. We established some semblance of a routine. My parents woke early, had breakfast together, and then my father would retreat to his temporary study while my mother busied herself with whatever mysterious activities occupied her days. I left for work by 8 and often didn't return until after 6, which limited our interactions. Evenings were spent in stilted conversation over dinner, after which we would each do our own thing. My father watching news channels at a volume that seemed designed to penetrate walls. My mother on the phone with friends, or my sister Lisa, and me usually retreating to my bedroom earlier than I would have if I'd been alone. It was during the second week that the cracks began to show. I came home one evening to find my mother had rearranged my kitchen cabinets. "I couldn't find anything," she explained when I stood, mouth agape, watching her place my coffee mugs on a shelf so high I'd need a stepladder to reach them. This makes much more sense. The next day, she'd replaced the shower curtain in my bathroom with one she'd brought from their house. "That old one was developing mildew at the bottom," she said. "This one is much nicer anyway." My father contributed to the takeover in his own way, commandeering the television every evening and expressing his disapproval when I suggested watching something other than the news or History Channel documentaries about World War II. "This is what you watch?" he scoffed one night when he found me watching a reality cooking show. "No wonder your brain is turning to mush." I tried to laugh it off, to remind myself that this was temporary, but with each passing day I felt my space, my sanctuary, slipping away. The house that had once been my retreat from the world was becoming a battleground where every object, every routine was up for negotiation. Things came to a head on a Saturday morning, about 3 weeks into their stay. I'd planned to sleep in, then spend the day working on a freelance project I'd taken on to supplement my income. Instead, I was jolted awake at 7 by the sound of children's voices and what seemed to be a herd of elephants thundering down my hallway. Bleary-eyed and confused, I stumbled out of my bedroom to find my sister's 3 children, ages 8, 6, and 4, racing through my house with my mother in the kitchen making pancakes and my father in his recliner, seemingly oblivious to the chaos. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice still rough with sleep. My mother looked up, surprised. "Oh, you're up. Lisa dropped the kids off for the day. She and John are having some couple time." I stared at her, trying to process this information. "You invited Lisa's kids over? Without asking me?" My mother's expression shifted to that familiar look of disapproval. "I didn't realize I needed permission to see my grandchildren. Besides, you were asleep and their family." "That's not the point, Mom. This is my house, and Auntie Kelly." My youngest nephew barreled into my legs, sticky hands grabbing at my pajama pants. "Grandma's making pancakes with chocolate chips." I forced a smile, patted his head, and extracted myself from his grip. "That's great, buddy. Hey, why don't you go wash those hands, okay?" As he ran off, I turned back to my tay. "Mother? Mom, I had work planned for today. Important work. I can't have this kind of disruption." She flipped a pancake with more force than necessary. "Well, it's too late now. They're already here, and I've promised them a day with their grandparents. You'll just have to adjust your plans." It wasn't worth arguing further. I retreated to my bedroom, gathered my laptop and materials, and headed to a coffee shop where I spent the day working amid the buzz of strangers, which was somehow less intrusive than the sound of my own family in my own home. When I returned, that evening, the kids were gone, but the evidence of their visit remained everywhere. Toys scattered across the living room floor, sticky fingerprints on my coffee table, a mysterious stain on the couch that hadn't been there that morning. "Did you have a productive day?" my mother asked, as if nothing was amiss. "Not really," I replied, too tired to mask my irritation. "It's hard to focus in a coffee shop for 8 hours." "Well," she sniffed, "family should come first anyway. Those children hardly ever see you." I swallowed the retort that rose to my lips. There was no point. In my mother's world, she was always right, and any disagreement was a personal attack. Instead, I began silently cleaning up the mess left behind. The following weekend brought more of the same, Lisa's children descending upon the house like tiny tornadoes, my workspace commandeered for arts and crafts, my reasonably clean house transformed into a sticky, noisy disaster zone. I tried talking to my mother about it, suggesting that perhaps Lisa could host the grandchildren at her own house occasionally, but was met with incredulity. Lisa's house is too small for the children to really play, my mother explained, as if speaking to someone very slow. And she's so busy with her job and the PTA. You have all this space and so much free time. The implication was clear. My life, my work, my space were all less valuable, less important than my sister's. It was a familiar dynamic, one that had colored our family relationships for as long as I could remember. Lisa, the perfect daughter with her husband, children, and involvement in community activities, versus me, the disappointment who couldn't even keep her marriage together. As the weeks stretched on, my parents settled into my house as if it were their own. My mother critiqued my grocery choices. Do you really need all these processed foods? My cleaning habits. When was the last time you dusted those blinds? And even my wardrobe. That shirt doesn't do anything for your figure, dear. My father commandeered not just the living room television, but also my home office on weekends, claiming he needed the space to organize some paperwork. I found myself spending more and more time away from home, working late at the office or finding excuses to meet friends for dinner. Anything to delay my return to what had once been my sanctuary, but now felt like enemy territory. It was around the 2-month mark of their stay when the next bombshell dropped. I came home from work to find my parents sitting at the dining table with identical expressions of determination that immediately set alarm bells ringing. "Kelly," my father began, "we need to talk about something important." I sank into a chair, across from them, already dreading whatever was coming. "What's up?" My mother reached across the table to take my hand, her voice taking on that syrupy quality that always preceded unwelcome news. "The contractor called today. There's been a setback with the renovation. The custom cabinets we ordered for the kitchen are delayed, and then they found some electrical issues that need to be addressed." I nodded slowly. "So, the renovation will take longer than expected?" "Exactly," my father said. "Probably another 2 months beyond what we'd originally planned." I fought back a wave of panic. 2 more months of this arrangement? I wasn't sure I could survive it without losing my mind entirely. But before I could respond, my mother continued. "And there's something else." She glanced at my father, who gave her a small nod. "Lisa and John are having some financial difficulties. John's company is downsizing, and they're worried about making their mortgage payments." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "That's unfortunate. Can they refinance or something?" My mother shook her head. "They've looked into all that. But we're thinking, well, since we're already here and the house has plenty of room." The implication hung in the air for a moment before I grasped it fully. "Wait, are you suggesting that Lisa and her family move in here too?" My father leaned forward. "Just temporarily, until John finds a new job. They could take the other 2 bedrooms upstairs. The kids could share." "That would be 5 more people," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "In my house, my 3-bathroom house. Family helps family, Kelly," my mother said firmly. "That's what we do." I sat there, stunned into silence. Not only were my parents extending their stay indefinitely, but now they wanted to move my sisters' entire family in as well? It would be 8 people crammed into a house meant for a family of 4 at most. 8 people, with me footing the bills, sacrificing my privacy, my space, my sanity. "No," I said finally, the word coming out more forcefully than I'd intended. "Absolutely not." My parents stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. "What do you mean, no?" my father demanded. "I mean, no. This is my house. I've accommodated you, both because I thought it would be temporary, but this is too much. Lisa and her family cannot move in here." My mother's face hardened. "I see. So you'll let your sister and her children end up on the street? Is that the kind of person you are?" "They won't be on the street, Mom. There are other options. They could rent an apartment, or stay with John's parents, or..." John's parents live in Florida, my mother interrupted, and renting would just put them deeper in debt. I can't believe how selfish you're being right now. It's not selfish to have boundaries, I replied, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. This is my home. I get to decide who lives here. My father's face reddened. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? By turning your back on your own family? And there it was again, the guilt trip, the emotional manipulation that had governed our relationship for decades, but this time, something inside me refused to bend. I'm not turning my back on anyone. I'm simply saying that 8 people cannot live in this house. It's not practical, and it's not what I want. What? You want? My mother's voice rose. What about what your sister needs? What about what's best for the family? I stood up, suddenly unable to sit still under the weight of their disapproval. I'm part of this family too, Mom. My needs matter too, and I need my space. I need some semblance of privacy and peace in my own home. So that's it? My father stood as well, towering over the table. You're choosing your space over your own flesh and blood? I'm choosing my sanity, I replied, moving toward the stairs. And this conversation is over. Lisa and her family are not moving in here, and that's final. I retreated to my bedroom, heart pounding, half expecting them to follow me and continue the argument. But they didn't. Instead, I heard them talking in low, urgent voices downstairs. For hours, occasionally catching phrases like, always been difficult, and selfish just like her father. I put in earbuds, turned on music, and tried to drown out both their voices and the guilt that threatened to overwhelm my resolve. The next morning, I left for work early, avoiding what was sure to be an awkward breakfast. All day, I found myself unable to focus, replaying the previous night's conversation in my head, wondering if I was being unreasonable. By the time I headed home, I'd decided to propose a compromise. Perhaps I could help Lisa and John financially for a few months, enough to keep them afloat until their situation improved. But when I pulled into my driveway that evening, something felt off. The house was dark, unusual for that time of day when my parents were typically home preparing dinner. I unlocked the front door and stepped into silence. Mom? Dad? I called out, flipping on lights as I moved through the downstairs rooms. No response. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, thinking perhaps they'd decided to take a nap or were simply giving me the silent treatment after our argument. As I reached the top of the stairs, I noticed that the door to their bedroom was ajar. Mom? I pushed the door open wider and froze. The room was empty. Not just unoccupied, but empty. The suitcases that had been propped in the corner were gone. The bedside table that had held my mother's collection of mystery novels was bare. Even the bedspread had been stripped off, leaving just the fitted sheet that had come with the guest room. A quick check of my father's study confirmed what I already suspected. They had packed up and left. No note, no explanation, just emptiness where their possessions had been. Only the china cabinet remained in the dining room, too unwieldy, perhaps, to move on short notice. I should have felt relieved. This was what I wanted, wasn't it? My house, back, my space, my privacy restored. But instead, a hollow feeling spread through my chest. They had simply gone, without a word, without a goodbye. It felt less like a resolution and more like a punishment, another way to make me feel guilty for standing my ground. I sank onto the edge of the stripped bed, trying to process the situation. Part of me wanted to call them, to demand an explanation, maybe even to apologize. But another part, a stronger part, recognized this as just another manipulation tactic. They'd left expecting me to come crawling back, begging for forgiveness, agreeing to whatever they wanted just to restore peace. Not this time. I spent that evening reclaiming my house. I moved my books back to the living room shelves where they belonged. I rearranged the kitchen cabinets to my liking. I cranked up music that my father would have hated and danced through the rooms, reveling in the freedom of solitude. The next morning was Friday, and I decided to take the day off work. I needed time to decompress, to fully process the events of the past 2 months and my parents' abrupt departure. I slept in, enjoyed a leisurely breakfast, and was just settling into the couch with a book when the doorbell rang. Puzzled, I wasn't expecting any packages or visitors. I went to answer. Standing on my doorstep were my sister Lisa, her husband John, and their 3 children, all of them laden with suitcases and duffel bags. "Surprise!" Lisa chirped, pushing past me into the foyer. "Mom said you'd be home today. We're here." I stood, frozen in the doorway as John and the children followed, the youngest already asking where his grandparents were and if there were any cookies. "Lisa," I managed finally, "what's going on?" My sister set down her bags and gave me a look that suggested I was being deliberately obtuse. "We're moving in, of course. Mom and Dad said everything was arranged. They've gone to stay with Auntie A. Margaret until the renovation is done, so there would be enough room for all of us here." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. My parents hadn't left in a huff. They'd left to make room for Lisa and her family. They'd simply decided to ignore my explicit refusal and forge ahead with their plan anyway. "Lisa," I said, keeping my voice as calm as possible, "there's been a misunderstanding. I told Mom and Dad last night that this wouldn't work. I never agreed to have you all move in." Lisa's smile faltered. "What do you mean? They said you were fine with it. They said you understood our situation and wanted to help." John looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Maybe we should call your parents, clear this up." "Yes," I agreed, already pulling out my phone. "Let's do that." I dialed my mother's number, putting the call on speaker so Lisa and John could hear. It rang several times before going to voicemail. I tried my father next, with the same result. They were screening my calls, letting me stew in the mess they'd created. "They're not answering," I said unnecessarily. "Lisa, I'm sorry, but there's been a miscommunication. I explicitly told Mom and Dad that you guys couldn't stay here. There simply isn't enough room, and frankly, I need my space." Lisa's expression hardened in a way that reminded me eerily of our mother. "Wow, Mom said you might try to back out, but I didn't believe her. I told her, no, Kelly wouldn't do that to us. She knows how desperate our situation is." She turned to her husband. "I guess she was right about Kelly all along." "That's not fair," I protested. "I never agreed to this in the first place. Mom and Dad tried to arrange it without my consent, and when I said no, they apparently lied to you about it. So you're just going to turn us away?" Lisa demanded, her voice rising. "You're going to make us leave right now, with nowhere to go?" I glanced at my niece and nephews, who were watching the adults with wide, confused eyes. This wasn't their fault. None of this was their fault. "Of course not," I sighed. "You can stay tonight while we figure something out. But this is not a long-term solution, Lisa. You understand that, right?" She didn't respond, just turned away, to direct her children to take their bags upstairs. John at least had the decency to look apologetic as he followed his family up the stairs. I retreated to the kitchen, where I leaned against the counter, trying to steady my breathing. This was a nightmare. My parents had manipulated the situation perfectly, putting me in a position where I had to either accommodate my sister's family against my will or be the villain who turned away children with nowhere to go. I tried calling my parents again and again and again throughout the day. No answer. I left increasingly frustrated voicemails, demanding they call me back and explain what they'd done. Nothing. That evening was tense. Lisa barely spoke to me, communicating only what was necessary about dinner and sleeping arrangements. The children, picking up on the tension, were subdued, which was a small mercy. John made awkward attempts at conversation, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but unwilling to challenge his wife. After everyone had gone to bed, I sat in my living room, scrolling through my phone contacts. Who could I talk to about this? Who would understand the absurdity of the situation without immediately taking my family's side or telling me I should just suck it up because their family. My thumb hovered over Mark's name, my ex-husband. He, more than anyone, understood the complicated dynamics of my family. But no, I wasn't that desperate yet. Instead, I called my best friend Rachel, despite the late hour. "They did what?" she exclaimed after I'd explained the situation. "Kelly, that's insane. They can't just move people into your house without your permission?" "Apparently they can," I replied, keeping my voice low to avoid being overheard upstairs. "And now I'm the bad guy if I kick them out." "You're not the bad guy," Rachel insisted. "Your parents are manipulating you, and they're using your sister's situation to do it. You have to stand firm on this." "But how?" "Lisa has 3 kids, and they really are in financial trouble. I can't just throw them out on the street." Rachel was silent for a moment. "No, you can't. But you can set a firm timeline. Help them find alternative arrangements. Make it clear this is temporary, like days temporary, not months." We talked for a while longer, strategizing. By the time I hung up, I had a plan. I would give Lisa and John 1 week, 7 days, to find another solution. I would even offer to loan them money for a security deposit on an apartment if that would help. But they would not be staying in my house long term, and I would make that abundantly clear in the morning. I slept fitfully, waking to the sound of children's feet thundering down the hallway at an ungodly hour. By the time I dragged myself downstairs, Lisa had taken over the kitchen, pans clattering as she made breakfast for her brood. She barely acknowledged me as I poured myself a cup of coffee. "Lisa," I said, "we need to talk about the situation." Without the kids around, she flipped a pancake with unnecessary force. "There's nothing to talk about. You made your position pretty clear yesterday." "Please, Lisa, this is important." She sighed dramatically, but turned to her oldest. "Ethan, take your brother and sister to watch cartoons in the living room. Mom and Aunt Kelly need to talk." Once the children had left, I sat down at the kitchen table, gesturing for Lisa to join me. After a moment's hesitation, she did, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. "I want to help you," I began. "I really do. But this, all of you moving in here indefinitely, is not a solution that works for me. I value my privacy, my space. I need it, especially after everything that happened with Mark." "Some people would be grateful for company after a divorce," Lisa muttered. I ignored the jab. "I'm willing to help you financially. I can loan you money for a security deposit on an apartment. I can even help with a few months' rent until John finds a new job. But I need you to find another living arrangement within the week." Lisa's expression shifted from defensive to incredulous. "A week? Are you serious? Do you have any idea how hard it is to find affordable housing for a family of 5? Or how long it might take John to find a job in this economy? I understand it's challenging, but—" "No, you don't understand anything," Lisa cut in, her voice rising. "You've always had it easy. Your fancy job, your big house all to yourself. You have no idea what it's like to struggle, to have to choose between paying the mortgage and buying groceries." Her words stung, not least because they echoed the narrative my parents had always pushed, that I was somehow living a charmed life while my sister did the real work of being a parent and community member. Never mind that I'd worked just as hard as Lisa, that I'd dealt with my own struggles, including a humiliating divorce that had left me emotionally shattered. "That's not fair, Lisa," I said quietly. "My life hasn't been easy. Different from yours, yes, but not easy." "Whatever." She stood up abruptly. "I'm not uprooting my children again in a week. It's cruel to even suggest it. If you want us gone so badly, you'll have to wait until we find a proper solution, however long that takes." And with that, she stormed out of the kitchen, leaving me sitting alone at the table, my coffee growing cold. The next few days were a study in passive-aggressive warfare. Lisa acted as if the house were hers, rearranging furniture, taking over the laundry room with mountains of her family's clothes, allowing her children to treat every room as their playground. John seemed perpetually apologetic, but did nothing to rein in his wife or children. I found myself retreating to my bedroom more and more, the only space that still felt somewhat mine. I worked from home as much as possible, not trusting what might happen if I left the house unattended for too long. On Wednesday evening, about 5 days after Lisa and her family had arrived, I came downstairs to find Lisa on the phone, her voice hushed but excited. "Yes, Mom, they're settling in well," she was saying. "The kids love having so much space to play." A pause. "No, she's barely around. Works late most days." Another pause, then a laugh. "I know, right? It's like it's our house. Now!" I stood frozen on the stairs, rage building inside me. They were talking about me, about my house, as if I were an inconvenient tenant rather than the homeowner. Lisa looked up, finally noticing me, and had the grace to look momentarily abashed. "I've got to go, Mom. I'll call you tomorrow." She hung up quickly. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough," I replied, continuing down the stairs. "So, you and Mom are still plotting behind my back?" Lisa had the audacity to look offended. "We weren't plotting. We were just talking. About how this is your house now?" She rolled her eyes. "It was just a figure of speech, Kelly. Don't be so dramatic." I took a deep breath, trying to control my anger. "Lisa, this needs to end. You and your family need to find another place to live soon. We're working on it," she said dismissively. "John has a job interview tomorrow. If he gets it, we'll start looking for apartments. And if he doesn't?" She shrugged. "Then we keep looking. These things take time, Kelly. You can't expect miracles." "I expect respect," I countered. "Respect for my home and respect for my boundaries, both of which have been non-existent since you arrived." Lisa's expression hardened. "You know what? I'm done with this conversation. I'm done trying to justify our presence to someone who clearly doesn't understand what it means to be family." She brushed past me toward the stairs. "By the way, Mom and Dad are coming over for dinner tomorrow night. I've already invited them, so don't even think about objecting." I stood there, seething, as she disappeared upstairs. She'd invited my parents, the very people who had orchestrated this entire mess, to my house without my permission. It was the final straw. I retreated to my room and called Rachel again. "I can't do this anymore," I told her, my voice breaking. "They've completely taken over. Lisa just informed me that our parents are coming for dinner tomorrow, in my house, that I own, without even asking me." "That's it," Rachel said firmly. "You need to take back control. Change the locks while they're out tomorrow. All of them. Lisa. John, the kids, your parents, don't let them back in. I can't lock children out of the house, Rachel. No. But you can make it clear this is your house and they're there on your terms. If they can't respect that, they need to leave. Immediately." We talked through the options, and I finally settled on a plan. The next day, I would take the day off work again. I would wait until Lisa and her family left the house, John for his job interview, Lisa to take the kids to their various activities, and then I would call a locksmith. I would change the locks and be there when they returned, keys in hand, but with conditions attached. If they couldn't agree to my terms, primarily that they would be out within 2 weeks, no exceptions, then they wouldn't be coming back in. It felt drastic, even cruel, but I was out of options. My home had been invaded, my boundaries trampled, my very identity as an adult with autonomy over my own life called into question. It had to stop. The next morning, I called in sick to work and then sat in my bedroom, listening to the sounds of the household waking up. John left first, dressed in his interview suit, tension evident in his tight smile as he said goodbye to his family. Lisa and the children followed about an hour later, the usual chaos of getting 3 small humans out the door, magnified by Lisa's constant reminders about behavior and schedules. As soon as their car pulled out of the driveway, I sprang into action. I called the locksmith, who promised to be there within the hour. While waiting, I began gathering Lisa and John's belongings from the common areas of the house: shoes left by the door, toys scattered across the living room, jackets hung haphazardly on the coat rack and piling them neatly near the front door. The locksmith arrived promptly, an older man with kind eyes who asked no questions as he set about changing the locks on both the front and back doors. He was finishing up, handing me the new keys, when my phone rang. It was my father. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" "Kelly." His voice was tight with barely contained anger. "Your mother and I just had a very disturbing conversation with Lisa. She says you've been threatening to throw them out." "I've been asking them to find alternative arrangements," I corrected. "This was never meant to be a permanent solution, as I made clear to you and Mom before you decided to move them in without my consent. Without your," he sputtered, "we thought you'd come around. We thought once you saw how much they needed help, you'd do the right thing." "The right thing isn't always what you think it is, Dad. I'm entitled to my own space, my own boundaries." "Boundaries," he scoffed. "That's therapist talk. In a family, we help each other, no questions asked. Even when that help is detrimental." "To one member of the family?" I challenged. "Even when it's forced rather than freely given?" He ignored my questions. "Your mother and I will be there for dinner tonight, as Lisa invited us. We'll discuss this then, all of us together. I expect you to be reasonable about this, Kelly." Before I could respond, he hung up. I stared at my phone, a mixture of frustration and disbelief washing over me. They still didn't get it. They still thought they could steamroll over my objections, that a family discussion would somehow make me see things their way. The locksmith cleared his throat, reminding me of his presence. "All done, ma'am. You're all set with the new keys." I thanked him, paid him, and showed him out. Then I stood in my foyer, keys in hand, considering my next move. I had hoped to be there when Lisa and her family returned to explain the situation, calmly, to offer the new keys with conditions attached. But now my parents were coming too, turning what I'd hoped would be a difficult but necessary conversation into what would inevitably be a 4-against-1 ambush. I needed to regroup, to come up with a new strategy. I couldn't face all of them at once. They would simply talk over me, dismiss my concerns, make me the villain in their family drama. I was still pondering my options when my phone pinged with a text from Lisa. "Going to Mom and Dad's for lunch. After kids' activities. We'll be back around 4 to prep for dinner. Don't forget they're coming at 6. Perfect. They would all arrive together, a united front against the selfish, unreasonable Kelly. Well, fine. They wanted a showdown? They'd get one. I spent the afternoon preparing. I wrote out what I wanted to say, practicing my delivery in the mirror until I felt confident I could stand my ground without getting emotional. I called Rachel for a pep talk. I even cleaned the house, not for them, but for me, a symbolic reclaiming of my space. At precisely 3:55 p.m., I heard a car pull into the driveway. I looked out the window to see Lisa's minivan, packed with her family and my parents. They were all coming in together, just as I'd suspected. I moved to the front door, keys in my pocket, and waited as they approached. Lisa reached the door first, trying the handle, then looking confused when it didn't open. She tried again, more forcefully, before finally noticing me watching through the window beside the door. "Kelly." Her voice was muffled through the glass. "The door's locked." I nodded, then pointed to the doorbell. She rang it, a look of confusion and growing anger on her face. I opened the door but remained standing in the threshold, blocking the entrance. "Hello, everyone," my mother pushed forward. "Kelly, what's going on? Why is the door locked?" "Because it's my house," I replied calmly, "and I decide who enters it." My father's face reddened. "What game are you playing, young lady? Let us in." "Right now." "I'm not playing a game, Dad. I'm establishing boundaries, something I should have done a long time ago." Lisa's children were looking increasingly confused and upset, The youngest was starting to whimper, clinging to his mother's leg. I felt a pang of guilt, but reminded myself that this situation wasn't of my making. I was simply responding to the untenable position they had put me in. "Kelly," Lisa hissed, "you're scaring the children. Stop this nonsense and let us in." "I will," I said, "under certain conditions." I pulled the new keys from my pocket, holding them up. "I've changed the locks. If you want to come back in, we need to have an understanding." "You changed the locks?" my mother gasped. "On your own family? I've never heard of such a thing." "Yes, I changed the locks, because this is my house, and all of you have been treating it and me with complete disregard for my wishes or autonomy." John looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Kelly, look, I understand you're upset, but can we please come in and talk about this? The kids are tired, and it's starting to get cold out here." I hesitated, looking at my niece and nephews. They didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this adult conflict. "The kids can come in," I conceded, stepping aside slightly. "John, you can bring them in and get them settled in front of the TV or something, but the rest of us are going to talk out here first." My father looked like he might explode. "This is ridiculous. You can't keep us standing on the porch like door-to-door salesmen." "Actually, I can," I replied. "And I will, until we've reached an understanding." John ushered the children inside, murmuring reassurances to them as they passed me with wide, uncertain eyes. Once they were inside, I stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind me, leaving me facing my parents and sister in the growing twilight. "Here's how this is going to work," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Lisa and John can stay for 2 more weeks. That's it. During that time, they need to find alternative housing. I'm willing to help financially if needed, but the timeline is non-negotiable." 2 weeks? Lisa sputtered. "That's impossible. You know how tight the housing market is right now, and John doesn't even know if he got the job yet." 2 weeks, I repeated firmly. "As for you two," I turned to my parents, "you're welcome to visit during the day, but you will not be staying here. And when you do visit, you will respect that this is my home. You will ask before rearranging things, before inviting others over, before making any decisions that affect my living space." My mother let out a harsh laugh. "Well, I never. After everything we've done for you, this is how you treat us? Like unwanted guests?" "You made yourselves unwanted guests," I replied, "when you moved Lisa's family in, against my explicit wishes. When you manipulated the situation to force my hand. When you treated me like a child in my own home. We were trying to help," my father interjected. "To make sure you weren't alone after the divorce, to bring the family together." "No," I shook my head. "You were trying to control me, just like you always have. But I'm an adult now, and this is my house, my rules." Lisa looked at our parents. "I told you she would be like this. Selfish to the core. Always has been." That stung, but I held firm. "It's not selfish to have boundaries, Lisa. It's not selfish to want control over my own living space. What's selfish is expecting me to upend my life indefinitely to solve your problems." "So that's your final word?" my mother asked, her voice cold. 2 weeks for Lisa and her family, and we're not welcome to stay at all." "That's right," I confirmed. "Those are my terms. Take them or leave them." They exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them that I recognized from childhood. The look they shared when they were about to present a united front. "Fine," my father said finally. "But don't expect us to come running the next time you need help. You've made your position very clear." I almost laughed at the irony. When had they ever come running to help me without strings attached? When had their help ever been about what I needed rather than what they wanted? "I understand," I said instead. "Now, do we have an agreement about the 2 weeks?" Lisa looked like she might argue further, but my father placed a restraining hand on her arm. 2 weeks, he agreed tersely. "But this isn't over, Kelly. This kind of behavior has consequences." The threat was clear. but I found I didn't care. What consequences could they possibly impose that were worse than what they'd already done? Invading my space, dismissing my needs, attempting to manipulate and control me. I'm sure it does, I replied. Now, shall we go inside? I believe we were supposed to have dinner. Dinner was a tense, silent affair. The children, picking up on the adult tension, ate quickly and asked to be excused to watch TV. John made awkward attempts at conversation that died under the weight of the others. Stony silence. My mother refused to look at me directly, speaking only to Lisa or the children. My father ate with military precision, his fork scraping against the plate the only sound he contributed. As soon as the meal was over, my parents made their excuses and left, my mother embracing Lisa as if she were going off to war rather than staying in a comfortable house for 2 more weeks. Lisa and John retreated upstairs with the children shortly after, leaving me alone to clean up the dinner dishes and reflect on the confrontation. I felt lighter. Despite the tension, despite knowing that my relationship with my family might never be the same, I felt as if a weight had been lifted. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I had stood firm against their manipulations and demands. I had asserted my right to determine what happened in my own home, in my own life. The next 2 weeks were stilted, but bearable. Lisa and John spent most of their time out of the house, presumably apartment hunting. When they were home, Lisa maintained a frosty politeness that bordered on hostility, while John seemed anxious to smooth things over, often engaging me in small talk when his wife wasn't around. My parents called Lisa daily, but didn't attempt to contact me. I told myself I was fine with that the distance was healthy, but occasionally I found myself staring at my phone, wondering if I should reach out, try to explain my position more clearly. On the Thursday of the second week, John came home with good news. He'd been offered a job at a company across town. It paid slightly less than his previous position, but came with better benefits and advancement opportunities. Lisa seemed genuinely happy for the first time since they'd arrived, and even unbent enough to share the news with me over dinner. "That's wonderful, John," I said sincerely. "Congratulations." "Thanks," he replied, a relieved smile spreading across his face. "It's a huge weight off our shoulders, and we found an apartment that might work for us too. It's a bit smaller than our house, but the location is good, close to the kids' school and not too far from my new office." Lisa shot him a warning look, as if he'd revealed too much, but I ignored it. "That sounds perfect. When can you move in?" "We can sign the lease tomorrow," John said, "but it'll be available in about a week and a half." I nodded, considering. Their 2-week deadline was in 3 days, but it seemed petty to force them out for a week just to make a point, especially when they had concrete plans to leave. "That works," I said finally. "You can stay until the apartment is ready, as long as we're all clear that's the move-out date." Lisa looked surprised, then suspicious. "Really? You're not going to kick us out on Sunday?" "No," I replied. "I'm not a monster, Lisa, despite what you might think. I just needed to know there was an end date. A real one, not a vague whenever we figure things out timeline." She didn't thank me, but some of the tension seemed to leave her shoulders. "Fine, we'll be out as soon as the apartment is ready." The following week and a half passed more comfortably. With an end in sight, Lisa's hostility diminished somewhat, and the children, sensing the change in atmosphere, became more relaxed as well. John received several calls from my parents, which he took in private, but neither Lisa nor John mentioned them to me, and I didn't ask. On moving day, I helped load their belongings into a rented moving truck and John's SUV. The children gave me awkward hugs goodbye, already excited about their new home and the adventure of moving. John shook my hand, then surprised me with a quick, one-armed hug. "Thanks for everything, Kelly," he said quietly. "I know this wasn't easy for anyone, but thanks." Lisa was less effusive, but managed a stiff nod as she headed for the car. "We'll let you know when we're settled," she said, which I took as a small olive branch. After they drove away, I stood in my driveway for a long moment, watching until their vehicles disappeared around the corner. Then I turned and went back inside, into my empty, quiet house, my house. I spent the rest of the day reclaiming the space. I moved furniture back where I wanted it, sorted through the guest rooms to make sure they hadn't left anything behind, opened windows to let fresh air circulate through rooms that had felt stuffy and claustrophobic for weeks. As evening fell, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my back porch, watching the sunset. My phone remained silent, no calls from my parents, no texts from Lisa. I wondered if this was the new normal, if the price of my independence would be family estrangement. Was surprised to find the thought didn't devastate me as it might have once. Yes, I loved my family, complicated as they were. Yes, there would be moments when their absence would sting. Holidays, birthdays, those times when a person naturally turns to family for support or celebration. But the peace I felt sitting on my porch, knowing that the space around me was truly mine again, knowing that I had finally drawn a line and held it, that peace was worth something too. The next morning, I returned to my routine with a renewed sense of appreciation for the simple pleasures of solitude. I made coffee exactly how I liked it, played music while I got dressed, left dishes in the sink when I hurried out to work, all without commentary or judgment. I was just sitting down at my desk when my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Lisa. "Kids keep asking when they can visit Aunt Kelly again. Maybe in a few weeks, once we're settled." I smiled, a small weight lifting that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was an acknowledgement, a willingness to move forward. I texted back, "I'd like that. Let me know when works for you." It wasn't until I was driving home that evening that I realized I hadn't heard from my parents in over 2 weeks. Part of me wanted to reach out, to try to bridge the gap, but another part, a stronger part, recognized that the ball was in their court now. I had set boundaries, clear and firm. It was up to them to decide if they could respect those boundaries, if they could see me as an adult with my own needs and rights rather than a child to be directed and controlled. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something odd. My front door was slightly ajar. I frowned, certain I'd locked it that morning. Had Lisa or John come by to pick up something they'd forgotten? But they would have called first, surely. I approached cautiously, pushing the door open wider. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone here?" No response, but I could hear movement from the kitchen. My heart racing, I grabbed an umbrella from the stand by the door, not much of a weapon but better than nothing, and moved slowly toward the sound. I turned the corner into the kitchen and froze. My mother was standing at the stove, stirring something in a pot, while my father sat at the kitchen table, newspaper spread out before him. Both looked up as I entered, expressions mild as if their presence in my home was the most natural thing in the world. "There you are," my mother said, turning back to her cooking. "We were wondering when you'd get home. Dinner's almost ready." I stared at them, the umbrella still clutched in my hand. What are you doing here? How did you get in?" "My father?" rustled his newspaper. "We still had our key from before. Thought we'd surprise you with dinner." "Your key shouldn't work," I said slowly. "I changed the locks." My mother laughed lightly. "Oh, Kelly, we had copies made before you changed them, just in case." The implications of what she was saying hit me like a physical blow. They had made copies of my house keys without my knowledge or permission. They had let themselves into my home while I was at work, with no warning, no invitation. "You need to leave," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Now." My father looked up. Surprise, evident on his face. "Leave? But your mother's made dinner. Your favorite, pot roast with those little potatoes you always liked." "I don't care if she's made a 7-course gourmet meal," I replied. "You can't just let yourselves into my house whenever you feel like it. That's breaking and entering," My mother turned from the stove, wooden spoon in hand. Don't be ridiculous, Kelly. It's not breaking and entering when it's family. We wanted to make peace, to show you we're willing to move forward from all that unpleasantness with Lisa. By breaking into my house? I was almost shouting now. By violating my privacy and security? How is that making peace? My father stood, his expression darkening. Watch your tone, young lady. We are still your parents, and we deserve respect. Respect? I laughed incredulously. Respect is earned. Respect includes acknowledging boundaries. What you're doing right now is the opposite of respect. My mother set down her spoon with a clatter. We thought you'd be grateful. After the way you treated us, we're still trying to mend fences, and this is how you respond? I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I need you both to leave. Right now. Give me your keys, all of them, and go. My father crossed his arms. And if we don't? This childish tantrum isn't accomplishing anything, Kelly. Sit down, have dinner with us, and we can talk about this reasonably. Something inside me snapped. The last threads of obligation, of conditioned compliance, finally broke. If you don't. Leave right now, I said, my voice deadly calm. I'm calling the police and reporting a break-in. My mother gasped. You wouldn't dare. I pulled out my phone. Try me. For a long moment, we stared at each other, a silent battle of wills. Then my father grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair. Fine, have it your way, but don't expect me to come running the next time I need help. Yes, I know. I gestured toward the door. Keys, please. Grudgingly, my father dug in his pocket and produced a key ring. He removed 2 keys, one for the front door, one for the back, and tossed them onto the counter. All of them, I insisted, including any copies you might have made. These are the only ones, he muttered, avoiding my gaze. I didn't believe him for a second. Fine, I'll be changing the locks again tomorrow anyway. My mother had been silent, but now she turned off the stove and moved to join my father at the door. I hope you're happy, she said, her voice tight with emotion. Throwing your own parents out like common criminals. I'm not happy, I replied honestly. I'm sad that it's come to this, that you couldn't respect the simple boundary of calling, before coming over, of waiting to be invited into my home like any other guest. Guest, my father repeated bitterly. Is that all we are to you now? Guests? In my home? Yes, that's exactly what you are. And guests don't make copies of keys without permission. They don't let themselves in when no one's home. They don't rearrange things to suit themselves or invite others over without asking. My mother's eyes filled with tears. I don't even know who you are anymore, Kelly. You've changed. Yes, I agreed. I have changed. I finally realized that I deserve the same respect and consideration that you demand for yourselves. I moved toward the door, opening it wider. Goodbye. They left without another word, my father's back rigid. With indignation, my mother's shoulders slumped in what looked like defeat, but I suspected was carefully performed martyrdom. I locked the door behind them, then went through the house, checking all the windows and the back door, making sure everything was secure. I returned to the kitchen and looked at the half-prepared meal my mother had abandoned. Pot roast had been my favorite as a child. She was right about that. But the sight of it now turned my stomach. I dumped it all in the trash, scrubbed the pot until it gleamed, and then ordered pizza. As promised, I had the locks changed again the next day. This time upgrading to a more secure system that couldn't be easily duplicated. I also installed a video doorbell, so I would know if anyone approached my house when I wasn't home. 2 days later, I received a text from Lisa. What did you do to Mom and Dad? They're devastated. I considered ignoring it, but instead replied, simply, they broke into my house using copies of keys they made without my permission. I asked them to leave. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, They said they were trying to surprise you with dinner. A surprise dinner doesn't require secret key copies or entering my house when I'm not home. They could have called. Another long pause, then. Maybe they should have called first. But they're really upset, Kelly. Mom's been crying for 2 days. I felt a pang of guilt, quickly replaced by resolve. I'm sorry she's upset, but I need my boundaries respected. That includes not breaking into my house. No response for several hours. Then, just as I was getting ready for bed, I get it. I wouldn't want someone in my space without permission either, even Mom and Dad. It wasn't exactly a declaration of support, but it was an acknowledgement, an understanding. From Lisa, that meant a lot. The next few weeks passed peacefully. I heard nothing from my parents, which was both a relief and a strange, dull ache. Lisa texted occasionally with updates on their new place or pictures of the kids, maintaining a cautious connection that I appreciated. 1 month after the break-in incident, my doorbell rang on a Saturday afternoon. I checked the video feed to see Lisa standing on my porch, alone. I opened the door, curious but wary. Hey, she replied, looking uncomfortable. Can I come in? Just me, she added quickly. The kids are with John at a movie. I stepped back, allowing her inside. Sure. Everything okay? She followed me to the living room, where we sat on opposite ends of the couch. Not really, she admitted after a moment. Mom and Dad are not handling things well. They talk about you constantly, about how ungrateful you are, how you've turned your back on the family. I sighed. I haven't turned my back on anyone. I've just established boundaries that they refuse to respect. I know, Lisa said, surprising me. I didn't get it at first, but John and I have been talking a lot about it. About how Mom and Dad have always been controlling. I guess I never noticed as much because I usually did what they wanted anyway. This was new territory for us. Lisa and I had never really discussed our parents' behavior, had never acknowledged the dynamics that shaped our family. She had always been the good daughter, the one who followed the prescribed path, while I was the difficult one, the disappointment. They mean well, I said, feeling oddly compelled to defend them despite everything. They just can't seem to see me, or you really, as adults with our own lives and choices. Lisa nodded. Yeah, it's been eye-opening, watching how they talk about you. It's made me think about how they talk about me when I'm not around. If I ever did something they disagreed with. She trailed off, looking troubled. We sat in silence for a moment, both contemplating the patterns of our family dynamics, seeing them perhaps more clearly than we ever had before. Anyway, Lisa continued eventually, I just wanted to check on you, and to let you know that I understand why you did what you did. With the locks and everything, I probably would have done the same. Coming from Lisa, this was monumental. I felt my throat tighten with unexpected emotion. Thank you. That means a lot. She shrugged, embarrassed. Yeah, well, sisters, right? After she left, I found myself reflecting on our conversation, on the subtle shift in our relationship. For the first time, we had connected not as rivals for our parents' approval, but as equals, as adults who shared a complicated family history. Over the next few months, a new pattern emerged. Lisa and I began to build a relationship independent of our parents, meeting for coffee or taking her kids to the park occasionally. It was cautious at first, both of us wary of old dynamics reasserting themselves, but gradually more comfortable, even enjoyable. My parents remained distant. They sent a card on my birthday with a gift certificate to a store I never shopped at, a gesture that felt more like an obligation than genuine warmth. I called to thank them, a brief, awkward conversation that neither acknowledged nor resolved the tension between us. But as the seasons changed, I found myself settling into a new normal. My house remained my sanctuary, my space to live as I chose without commentary or criticism. I began dating again, cautiously at first, then with more confidence. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during my marriage and subsequent isolation. And, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the ache of my parents' disapproval began to fade. I found myself caring less about their judgment, less wounded by their tactics, more certain of my own worth independent of their validation. 6 months after the lock-changing incident, Lisa invited me to her oldest son's birthday party. "Mom and Dad will be there," she warned, "but they've promised to be civil." I hesitated, weighing the potential for drama against my desire to be present for my nephew. "I'll come," I decided, "but I'll probably keep it brief." The party was at a local pizza place, loud with the shrieks of excited children and arcade games. I arrived with a gift and immediately spotted my parents across the room, deep in conversation with John's parents. I greeted Lisa and John, handed my gift to my beaming nephew, and then, steeling myself, approached my parents. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "How are you both?" My mother looked startled, as if she hadn't expected me to approach them at all. "We're fine," she replied after a moment. "And you?" "I'm good." I turned to my father. "Dad." He nodded, stiffly. "Kelly, it wasn't warm, but it wasn't hostile either." We exchanged a few more pleasantries, comments about the party, about the weather, careful avoidance of anything more personal, before I excused myself to watch my nephew open his gifts. As I drove home later, I realized that the encounter had left me feeling not hurt or angry, but oddly at peace. I had faced them on my terms, in a neutral setting, without either capitulating to their expectations or engaging in further conflict. That night, lying in bed in my quiet, peaceful house, I thought about the journey of the past year. From the shock of my husband's betrayal, to the invasion of my home by well-meaning but boundary-crossing family members, to the final confrontation that had led to a painful but necessary distancing. I had lost some things along the way. The blind obedience that had characterized my relationship with my parents, the illusion of unconditional family support, the comfortable familiarity of old patterns even when they were harmful. But I had gained something more valuable, a sense of self-determination, of ownership over my own life and space, of the kind of peace that comes from knowing your own worth and standing firm in it. My phone buzzed with a text. It was from Lisa. "Thanks for coming today. The kids were thrilled to see you. Brunch next weekend, just us?" I smiled and texted back, "Absolutely, my treat." As I set my phone aside and turned out the light, I felt a profound sense of contentment wash over me. My life wasn't perfect. My family relationships were still complicated, still in flux. But, for the first time in as long as I could remember, I was living on my own terms, making my own choices, unapologetically occupying my own space. And that, I realized, was freedom.